The day they made Elias Mercer kneel on the warehouse floor while half the afternoon shift laughed at him, he did not defend himself. He did not shout. He did not throw the broken scanner back at the supervisor who had tossed it near his feet and ordered him to pick it up like a servant. Elias simply lowered his head, swallowed the humiliation burning in his throat, and thought about the little girl waiting for him at home with a bowl of reheated soup and a school drawing taped above their kitchen table. What no one in that warehouse knew was that the quiet single father they had spent years treating like he was nothing would one day walk back through those same doors wearing the same old watch, carrying the same scars, and holding the keys to the entire company. Before we continue, please take a moment to like, comment, share this story, and subscribe to LOL Stories if you believe kindness still matters and people deserve second chances. And tell us something that always amazes us: where in the world are you watching from right now? Somewhere, another person may be listening from a place just like yours, carrying a struggle nobody else can see. Elias had not always looked tired. There were photographs in a cardboard box beneath his bed that proved it. In those pictures, he was younger, broader in the shoulders, smiling beside his wife, Nadia, with a kind of easy happiness that now seemed to belong to another lifetime. They had married with almost nothing. Their first apartment had leaking pipes, a refrigerator that hummed louder than the television, and a kitchen so small they could not open the oven and the cabinet at the same time. But they had laughed there. They had danced barefoot after midnight. And when their daughter, Junie, was born, Elias remembered holding the tiny baby against his chest and promising Nadia that no matter how hard life became, their child would always feel safe. 5 years later, Nadia was gone. Cancer did not enter their lives dramatically. It arrived quietly, disguised as exhaustion, then pain, then a doctor's careful expression in a room that suddenly felt too small. Elias spent the next 18 months working during the day and sleeping in hospital chairs at night. He sold their second car. Then the furniture they did not need. Then nearly everything they had saved. When Nadia died, Elias was left with medical debt, a 7-year-old daughter who still woke up calling for her mother, and a grief so heavy that some mornings simply putting on his work boots felt like lifting a building. He worked at Halcyon Industrial Supply, a regional distribution company housed inside an aging complex near the edge of the city. Elias had started there before Junie was born. He knew every loading bay, every conveyor motor, every emergency panel and every temperamental forklift in the building. Officially, his title was facilities technician. In reality, whenever something failed, people found Elias. For years, that had earned him respect. Then the company changed. The founder retired. A corporate management team took over. Experienced workers were pushed aside, and people who knew how to make presentations were promoted above people who knew how to keep the building running. Elias's new operations supervisor, Trent Halvers, was a man who treated cruelty like leadership. Trent noticed Elias's worn boots, his old car, the way he sometimes checked his phone when Junie's school called. He learned that Elias could not afford to lose his job, and from that moment, he seemed to enjoy reminding him of it. At first, the humiliations were small. Trent assigned Elias the dirtiest repairs even when younger technicians were available. He criticized him in meetings for arriving 3 minutes late after dropping Junie at school. He called him the company dinosaur and laughed about his patched lunch bag. Whenever Elias offered a suggestion, Trent ignored it, only to repeat the same idea days later as his own. Elias endured it. Every morning, he woke before sunrise, packed Junie's lunch, braided her hair badly enough that she usually had to fix it herself, and drove her to school in a 12-year-old sedan whose heater worked only when it felt generous. Every evening, he returned home exhausted and tried to become someone different before opening the front door. He did not want Junie to see the defeated men from the warehouse. He wanted her to see her father. So he smiled. He helped with fractions. He burned pancakes on Saturdays. He sat through school concerts and clapped louder than anyone. And when Junie asked why he looked sad sometimes, Elias told her he was only tired. But children notice what adults try to hide. One winter evening, Junie found him sitting alone at the kitchen table with an overdue electricity notice in one hand and a photograph of Nadia in the other. Elias quickly wiped his face, but it was too late. Junie walked over without asking questions and wrapped her small arms around his shoulders. That embrace nearly broke him. The next morning, Elias went to work determined to survive another day. It became the worst day of his life at Halcyon. A shipping scanner had been damaged after Trent's favorite employee, Cole, dropped it from a loading platform. Everyone near the platform had seen what happened. But when the regional director arrived unexpectedly and questioned the delay, Trent blamed Elias. Elias calmly explained that he had not even been in that section of the warehouse. Trent's face hardened. In front of nearly 30 employees, he accused Elias of making excuses. Then he tossed the broken scanner onto the floor beside him and told him that if he was so good at fixing things, he should start by picking up his mess. Silence filled the warehouse. Then Cole laughed. Another worker joined him. A few others followed, not because the situation was funny, but because people often laugh when cruelty belongs to someone else. Elias looked around the room. Some faces were amused. Some were uncomfortable. One woman, Marnie Vale, stared at the floor because she was ashamed to witness it and too afraid to intervene. Elias felt his ears burning. He thought of Nadia. He thought of Junie. He thought of the electricity bill. Then he bent down and picked up the scanner. That was when Trent added one final blow. He told Elias that people like him should be grateful anyone still paid them at all. Something changed inside Elias. Not anger. Something quieter. He stood, placed the scanner on the workbench, removed his employee badge, and set it beside the broken device. For the first time in years, Trent stopped smiling. Elias did not deliver a speech. He simply walked away. The moment he reached his car, his hands began shaking. Leaving felt brave for exactly 30 seconds. Then reality arrived. He had no job. No savings. No backup plan. A child depended on him. Elias sat behind the steering wheel and cried harder than he had since Nadia's funeral. For 2 weeks, he applied everywhere. Maintenance companies. Factories. Apartment complexes. Hospitals. He accepted temporary repair work and drove delivery routes at night. He sold the last expensive thing he owned, a set of professional tools Nadia had bought him for their 10th anniversary. Junie noticed that he was home more often, but Elias told her the company was restructuring. Then, one evening, she placed a jar of coins on the kitchen table. It contained $23.80. Her entire savings. She told him without saying much that they could use it for groceries. Elias turned away because he could not let her see his face. That night, after Junie fell asleep, he made himself a promise. He would never again stay somewhere that required him to surrender his dignity just to survive. The next morning, a call came from a number he did not recognize. The man on the other end was Sebastian Rourke, a retired executive who had once handled one of Halcyon's largest transportation contracts. Years earlier, Elias had redesigned a loading process after noticing dangerous congestion near the western dock. Management had ignored him, but Sebastian had remembered. The change Elias proposed had later been implemented and had saved the client hundreds of thousands of dollars in delays and damaged goods. Sebastian had recently learned Elias no longer worked at Halcyon. He offered him consulting work. Elias almost thought it was a joke. The first project lasted 3 weeks. Elias reorganized maintenance schedules for a struggling distribution center and prevented the company from replacing equipment that only needed proper repairs. The owners were stunned by how much money he saved them. Then they recommended him to someone else. 1 job became 3. 3 became 10. For the first time, Elias discovered that the knowledge Halcyon had treated as worthless was valuable everywhere else. He created a small operations consulting firm from his kitchen table. Junie designed the first logo with colored pencils. It was crooked and cheerful, and Elias used it anyway. The business grew slowly. Then quickly. Within 18 months, Elias employed 6 people, including Marnie, who had finally left Halcyon after Trent humiliated her in front of a client. She apologized to Elias for staying silent that day in the warehouse. Elias told her that fear could make good people quiet, but courage was what they chose to do afterward. He never asked her to apologize again. Meanwhile, Halcyon began collapsing. The company had looked strong from the outside, but years of poor management had hollowed it out. Experienced employees kept leaving. Equipment failures increased. Major customers moved their contracts elsewhere. Trent continued blaming everyone beneath him until there were fewer and fewer people left to blame. Then Elias received another unexpected call. This time it came from an investment group. Halcyon's owners were preparing to sell. The company was deeply distressed, but its land, distribution network, and remaining contracts still had value. The investors wanted someone who understood the operation before they considered purchasing it. They wanted Elias. Walking back into Halcyon as a consultant was harder than he expected. The security desk was the same. The fluorescent lights were the same. Even the smell of machine oil and cardboard brought back memories so sharply that for a moment he was once again the exhausted widower standing in front of laughing co-workers. Then he saw the western loading bay. The place where he had bent down to pick up the broken scanner. Elias stood there alone for several seconds. He could almost hear the laughter. But this time, he did not lower his head. Over the next month, Elias studied everything. He discovered wasteful contracts, neglected machinery, unnecessary management positions, and a workforce that had lost all faith in leadership. But he also found something worth saving. People. Good people. Warehouse employees who still worked hard. Drivers who knew every customer by name. Technicians who had stayed because their families depended on them. Elias told the investors Halcyon could survive, but only if it was rebuilt around the workers who had been ignored. The investors agreed to finance an acquisition on one condition. They wanted Elias to lead it and invest alongside them. Elias stared at the proposal for a long time. The amount required would consume almost everything he had built. It was the biggest risk of his life. That evening, he sat at the kitchen table with Junie, now 10 years old, and explained that he had a chance to buy part of the company where he used to work. He admitted he was afraid. Junie looked at him with the simple certainty only a child can possess. She reminded him that he fixed broken things. Those words stayed with him. The deal closed 11 weeks later. On a rainy Monday morning, every Halcyon employee was ordered to attend an all-company meeting. Rumors spread quickly. Some believed the company was shutting down. Others expected layoffs. Trent arrived wearing an expensive suit and carrying the confidence of a man convinced he would be promoted under the new ownership. He stood near the front, whispering to senior managers. Then the doors opened. Elias walked in. The room went silent. Marnie entered beside him carrying a folder. Behind them came the representatives of the investment group. Trent's expression changed slowly. First confusion. Then recognition. Then fear. Elias stepped onto the same warehouse floor where he had once been publicly humiliated. He looked around at the employees. Some remembered laughing. Some remembered looking away. Some had not been there at all. Elias could have used that moment for revenge. He could have embarrassed Trent in front of everyone. He could have repeated every cruel word ever spoken to him. Instead, he announced that Halcyon Industrial Supply had been purchased by a new ownership group. Then he introduced himself as its managing owner. No one laughed. Trent looked as though the floor had disappeared beneath him. But Elias was not finished. He explained that the company would change. Hourly workers would have a formal voice in safety decisions. Experienced employees would be considered for advancement before outside managers were hired. Parents would have access to flexible emergency leave. Public humiliation would no longer be tolerated as a management practice. Leadership, Elias said, would be measured by how people were treated when they had the least power in the room. Several employees lowered their eyes. Elias did not need to name anyone. Everyone understood. Trent was dismissed later that day, privately. Not publicly. When Marnie asked why Elias had not fired him in front of everyone, Elias simply said he had spent too many years remembering what humiliation felt like to become the kind of man who enjoyed giving it back. That decision became the foundation of the new Halcyon. The company did not transform overnight. There were difficult months, lost contracts, long nights, and moments when Elias feared he had made a terrible mistake. But gradually, the business recovered. Employees who had once been ignored began offering ideas. Turnover fell. Customers returned. Profits followed. Elias kept his old employee badge in the top drawer of his desk. Not as a trophy. As a reminder. Years later, on the anniversary of the acquisition, Elias stood near the western loading bay watching new employees attend orientation. On the wall nearby hung a framed statement that every manager was required to read. It said that no job title gave a person permission to take away another person's dignity. Junie, now a teenager, visited the warehouse that afternoon. She found her father standing quietly near the place where his life had once fallen apart. She slipped her arm through his. Elias looked across the building and remembered the men he had been that terrible day, exhausted, grieving, frightened, convinced he was trapped. He wished he could go back and tell that man something. Not that he would become wealthy. Not that he would own the company. Not even that the people who hurt him would eventually regret it. He wanted to tell him that being treated as worthless did not make him worthless. Sometimes the darkest moment of your life is not the end of your story. Sometimes it is the place where the road finally turns. And sometimes the person forced to their knees today is only gathering the strength to stand taller tomorrow. If this story touched your heart, reminded you of someone who kept going when life tried to break them, or made you believe that dignity and kindness still matter, please like this video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe to LOL Stories. Your support helps stories like Elias's reach people who may be silently fighting their own battles right now. Special request, comment below, my worth is not decided by how others treat me, if you believe no humiliation, rejection, or difficult season can determine the rest of your life. Because Elias Mercer learned something more valuable than revenge. The greatest victory was never walking back into the building as its owner. It was walking back without hatred in his heart. The people who humiliated him had once believed his silence meant weakness. They never understood that every morning he got out of bed for his daughter, every night he survived his grief, and every time he chose not to become cruel in a cruel world, he was becoming stronger. And in the end, the men they once ordered to bow his head became the men who taught an entire company how to hold theirs high.